The laughter around the dinner table stopped when my husband leaned back in his chair, clinked his glass, and told his friends, "She's just a housewife. I make the real money." He didn't know. The ink had barely dried on my $80 million deal. The small dining room smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Ophie moved between the kitchen and the table, refilling glasses and making sure everyone had enough to eat. Taremba's friends were laughing at his stories, the kind of loud laughter that filled every corner of the room. Then, in the middle of pouring himself another drink, Taremba leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "Ophie? She just stays home and cooks. I'm the one making the real money here." His friends chuckled awkwardly, glancing at her as if unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. Ophie's lips curved into a small, polite smile, the kind she used when she didn't want anyone to see what she was feeling. But inside, something shifted. The words didn't just sting, they sank deep, cutting through her like a sharp blade. She had heard small remarks before, little dismissals hidden as jokes, but this time was different. This time, in front of others, he had reduced her entire life to nothing. Her hand stayed steady as she set down a dish, but her chest felt tight, her heart beating fast. She sat quietly, letting the conversation move on, but inside her, something broke. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, like the sound of a crack running through glass, the kind that spreads slowly until the whole thing shatters. And in that moment, Ophie knew she would never forget what he had just said. Everyone around Ophie thought they knew her life. To them, she was just a housewife who woke up early, cooked breakfast, swept the floors, did the laundry, and prepared dinner before her husband came home. They believed her whole world was inside the four walls of their home. But there was another side of Ophie that nobody saw, not even Taremba. When the laundry was spinning in the machine and the soup was simmering on the stove, she would quietly slip into a small corner of the bedroom with her old, second-hand laptop. The keys were worn, the screen had a tiny crack in one corner, but to her, it was a doorway to a different life. It started as curiosity, reading about how people built websites and started businesses online. But slowly, it became more than that. She began sketching ideas in an old notebook, thinking about the small market women she met every week, the ones who complained about slow sales and difficulty reaching customers. She saw their struggles, and an idea grew in her mind. What if there was a simple online space where these sellers could display their goods and connect with buyers without paying high fees or traveling far? Day after day, she taught herself how to make it real. She didn't have money for expensive courses, so she searched for free tutorials, watched videos late into the night, and practiced until her eyes were heavy. Some nights, her back ached from bending over the laptop for hours, but she didn't stop. She learned how to design, how to code, how to make the platform easy for people who had never used technology before. When Taremba came home, she closed the laptop and went back to being the wife he thought she was. He never asked what she did in her spare time. He assumed she just scrolled through gossip or recipes. No one knew that, behind closed doors, she was slowly building something powerful. There were moments when she wanted to share her progress, moments when she felt proud of a new feature she had created or when a small test version actually worked. But she kept quiet. She knew if she told Taremba, he might laugh or tell her to stop wasting her time. So she kept it as her secret world, one where she was more than just the woman in the kitchen. And every time she added a new piece to her platform, she felt a spark of hope. It wasn't just about making money, it was about proving to herself that she could create something valuable. Little by little, she was planting seeds for a future nobody could see yet. To the outside world, Ophie was just a housewife. But in those quiet hours, she was becoming something far greater, the woman they never saw. The journey didn't start overnight. It began years ago, when Ophie first thought of creating something that could change the lives of market sellers. At first, she had no idea how to turn the idea into reality, but she decided to learn, one step at a time. She used whatever little time she could steal from her daily chores. Early in the mornings, before anyone woke up, she would sit with her old laptop and watch free coding tutorials. The internet was slow, the videos often froze, but she was patient. She wrote down everything she learned in a notebook with frayed pages, repeating lessons until she understood them. She built her first version of the platform and tested it with a few shop owners she knew. It was far from perfect. Sometimes the page wouldn't load, sometimes the pictures wouldn't show, but instead of giving up, she fixed each problem slowly. She met with vendors in their tiny shops, explaining how they could list their goods online. Some didn't believe it would work, but others agreed to try. She helped them take photos, write short descriptions, and post them. Every small success gave her courage to keep going. To keep her secret safe, Ofi worked in silence. She didn't share her plans with friends or family. And she never told Taremba. She knew how easily his pride was hurt, and she could already imagine him saying, "You can't do this," or "Stay in your lane." So she decided it was better to grow her dream quietly, like a seed hidden under the soil, away from anyone who might step on it before it could sprout. Her life became a careful balance, cooking meals, washing clothes, smiling when her husband's friends visited, then slipping away to send emails to potential partners. Sometimes, she stayed up past midnight, her eyes heavy but her mind alive, tweaking the platform or messaging small vendors in different towns. She learned how to negotiate without fear, how to talk to businesspeople who had more money and power than her, and how to make them listen. There were challenges she never spoke of. Times when the laptop nearly broke and she had to save for months to repair it. Days when a vendor pulled out of a deal at the last minute. Nights when she felt completely alone, wondering if she was wasting her time. But each time doubt crept in, she reminded herself why she started, to give small market sellers a chance to grow, just like she wanted to grow. Years passed like this, the world around her thinking she was living the same ordinary life, while quietly, she was building something extraordinary. Every line of code she wrote, every seller she convinced, every problem she solved was a seed planted. And though no one could see it yet, Ofi knew those silent seeds would one day bloom into something that would change everything. The day had started with so much hope. Ofi had been speaking to her first potential investor for weeks, explaining her platform and showing its progress. He had promised to send the funds that would help her improve the system and expand to more markets. She had even imagined how many more sellers she could bring on board. But that evening, an email arrived with a short, cold message. He had changed his mind. No explanation, no apology, just a polite goodbye. Her hands trembled as she read it over and over, her chest tightening. She went into the kitchen, away from the small desk where she worked, and sat on a stool. Tears slid down her cheeks, not just because of the money, but because of all the time, effort, and hope she had poured into this dream. She thought of all the nights she had stayed awake coding, all the market women who had trusted her, and it felt like everything was slipping away. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold herself together. That's when Taremba walked in. He saw her wiping her eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" She hesitated, but then admitted, the investor pulled out. Instead of comforting her, he gave a small laugh and shook his head. "I told you this was a waste of time. You should focus on real work, not silly hobbies that will never pay the bills." The words stung worse than the rejection email. He didn't just doubt her, he dismissed everything she had been fighting for. When he left the kitchen, she stayed there, staring at the wall. For the first time, she felt completely powerless. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had been chasing something impossible. She walked back to her desk, opened her laptop, and hovered over the folder that held all her work. Her finger rested on the delete button. Her heart felt heavy, and the idea of letting go almost felt like relief. But just then, a notification popped up, a new message. She opened it without thinking. It was from one of the smallest shop owners on her platform, a woman who sold handmade baskets. The message was short but warm. "Sister Ofi, today I sold 3 baskets to a customer who found me on your website. You don't know how much this means to me. May God bless you." Ofi stared at the words, her eyes filling again, but this time not with defeat. That little message reminded her why she started. It wasn't about investors or big deals. It was about real people whose lives could change because of her work. She closed the delete window, saved all her files twice, and whispered to herself that she wasn't done yet. That night, she decided she would keep going, no matter how many doors closed in her face. Months passed, and Ofi kept building quietly, improving her platform little by little. She didn't have fancy offices or a big team, but her work began to spread beyond her town. More and more market sellers joined, and buyers from other cities started noticing. One afternoon, while checking her emails, she saw a message from someone she had never heard of, an investor from Ghana. He had been following her platform for weeks, studying how it worked and how quickly it was growing. His words were direct, he was impressed, and he wanted to talk. At first, Ofi thought it might be a scam. Why would someone from another country be interested in her small project? But when they spoke over a video call, she realized he was serious. He had invested in several successful African tech companies before, and he saw something in her platform that others had missed: its ability to connect small sellers to big markets without complicated systems. They began discussing terms. The investor wanted to own a large part of the company in exchange for his funding, but Ofi had learned enough to know her worth. Even though she had never negotiated a deal of this size, she took her time, read every line, and sometimes said no when an offer didn't feel right. The talks went on for weeks, sometimes late into the night. It wasn't easy. There were moments she felt overwhelmed, moments she thought about settling for less just to end the pressure. But she reminded herself of the years she had worked in silence, the nights she had stayed awake, and the dreams she had for the sellers who depended on her. She wasn't going to give away her life's work cheaply. Finally, one crisp morning, they agreed on the terms. The investor would buy into the company for a deal worth $80 million, while Ofi kept control of the majority. The money would allow her to expand across multiple African countries, hire staff, and improve the platform. She could hardly believe it. The idea that once lived only in her mind was now valued beyond her imagination. They met in a small cafe to sign the documents. It was quiet, with the sound of coffee cups being set down on tables. No big crowd, no news cameras, no celebration. Just Ofi, the investor, and the soft scratch of pens signing their names. When it was done, he shook her hand warmly and said, "This is only the beginning." Ofi walked out of that cafe with the contract in her bag and $80 million about to hit her account. She didn't call anyone. She didn't even tell Taremba. She wanted this moment to belong to her alone for now. The world still saw her as just a housewife, but she knew the truth: she had just closed the deal of a lifetime, and no one could take that from her. Weeks after signing the deal, life at home went on as if nothing had changed. Ofi still cooked meals, cleaned the house, and smiled when guests came over. She had not spent a single dollar from the deal yet, choosing instead to let it sit quietly in her account. She knew there would be a right moment to speak, but this was not it. One Friday evening, Taremba invited 3 of his closest friends for dinner. The table was set with steaming bowls of stew, fresh bread, and roasted fish. Laughter and conversation filled the air as they talked about work, politics, and business. At one point, one of the friends began bragging about his recent promotion, and Taremba, not wanting to be outdone, leaned back in his chair and started talking about his own salary. "I'm the one carrying this house," he said with a proud grin. "All the bills, all the comfort we have, it's all me. Ofi doesn't work. She just, stays home and cooks." He waved his hand toward her like she was part of the furniture. A few of his friends gave short, awkward laughs, while others avoided her eyes. Ofi felt her stomach tighten. Her hand stayed steady as she poured water into a glass, but inside, her heart was beating hard. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, but she kept her face calm. She didn't interrupt him, didn't argue, didn't try to prove herself. Years of quiet work had taught her the value of patience. She knew there was more power in silence than in defending herself too soon. The conversation moved on. But the sting of his words stayed with her. Every bite she took tasted like paper. She listened as the men continued to talk about investments, cars, and salaries, all the while speaking as if she had no understanding of any of it. Her hands rested in her lap, but her mind was far away, replaying every moment she had stayed up late working, every meeting she had taken in secret, every time she had doubted herself, and then remembered why she started. Her eyes moved to Taremba, watching him laugh and boast, completely unaware that the woman he was dismissing had just closed an $80 million deal. A part of her wanted to stand up right then, to end the conversation with the truth. But another part of her, the wiser, calmer part, knew that the perfect moment would come, and when it did, the impact would be unforgettable. So she smiled faintly, nodded when his friends looked her way, and let them keep talking. On the outside, she was the quiet, obedient wife. But inside, a fire was starting to burn, a fire that would soon change everything. The evening had been full of small conversations and laughter, though Ofi stayed mostly quiet, only speaking when necessary. She served the last round of drinks, placing glasses in front of Taremba's friends, when one of them, a man named Joram, leaned back and looked at her with mild curiosity. So, Ophi, he said in a tone that was light but edged with something sharper, what do you actually do all day? The table went silent for a moment. It wasn't the first time she had been asked that question, but this time, with Taremba's earlier words still hanging in the air, it felt different. Ophi's eyes met Joram's for a second, then flicked briefly toward her husband, who was already smirking as if expecting her to say something ordinary, something that would confirm his version of her life. But instead, she gave a small, calm smile. It wasn't defensive or nervous, it was the kind of smile that hides more than it shows. She set down the jug of water she was holding and said softly, I'll show you. Her voice was steady, almost casual, but the words carried a weight none of them expected. The friends exchanged quick glances, unsure of what she meant. Taremba chuckled lightly, shaking his head as if she was about to say something amusing. But Ophi didn't move immediately. She let the silence stretch just enough for it to feel strange, just enough for curiosity to replace whatever judgment they had been holding on to. She then walked to the sideboard, picked up her phone, and stood for a moment scrolling. Her movements were unhurried, her posture relaxed, as if she had all the time in the world. Inside, her heart was beating a little faster, but not from fear, from the knowledge that the moment she had been quietly waiting for was finally here. Joram tilted his head, trying to read her expression. Another friend shifted in his chair, leaning forward slightly, sensing something was about to happen. Taremba took a sip of his drink, still smiling, still unaware. When Ophi finally looked up from her phone, she didn't explain, didn't give a speech. She simply stepped toward the table, holding the phone loosely in one hand. Her calmness was deliberate, each movement measured, as though she was about to place something very fragile, or very powerful, in front of them. The air in the room had changed. The question, meant to expose her as someone who did nothing, had instead opened a door she had kept locked for years. And with one short answer, I'll show you, she had turned their casual curiosity into anticipation. What none of them knew was that the truth she was about to reveal would not only silence the table, but also change the way they looked at her forever. Ophi stood at the edge of the table, her phone resting loosely in her hand. The quiet stretched as the men waited for her to explain herself, but she didn't speak. Instead, she tapped her screen, swiped twice, and opened her bank app. Her fingers moved without hesitation, as though she had done this 100 times before. Then she turned the phone around and placed it gently in the center of the table, the screen facing upward. At first, no one leaned in. They probably thought it was some picture or message she wanted to show. But then Joram's eyes caught the bold numbers on the display. His brows shot up, and without thinking, he pushed his chair slightly closer. The others followed his gaze, and one by one, their expressions shifted from mild curiosity to shock. On the screen, under her name, sat the number, $80,437,522. Not in investments. Not in promises. Cleared. Available. Sitting in her personal account. For a moment, no one said a word. The clinking of forks and glasses from earlier had stopped completely. One of the men's eyes darted from the screen to Ophi's face, as if trying to understand how the quiet woman serving their food had that kind of money. Joram gave a short, stunned laugh, then stopped himself. Another friend leaned back, blinking rapidly, his mind clearly racing. Is that yours?" he finally asked, his voice low. Ophi didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at him, her calm expression unchanged. Then she nodded once. "All mine," she said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Taremba's smile vanish. His jaw tightened, his shoulders stiffened, and his grip on his glass grew firmer. He didn't reach for the phone, but his eyes stayed locked on the screen like he couldn't look away. The friends exchanged glances, each one silently asking the same question: how? How had she done this without anyone knowing? But Ophi offered no explanation. She didn't need to. The number spoke for itself. For years, she had been underestimated, dismissed, even mocked. And now, without raising her voice or demanding attention, she had placed proof of her worth in the middle of the table for all to see. No long speeches. No arguments. Just the truth, in numbers so large they made the air feel heavier. Someone's fork slipped from their hand, hitting the plate with a sharp sound. It was the only noise in the room. Ophi took her phone back, locked the screen, and slipped it into her pocket. She gave a small, polite smile, as if nothing unusual had happened, and returned to her seat. But the dinner had changed. Nothing about her would ever be looked at the same way again, especially by Taremba. Ofi sat there for a moment, her hands resting calmly on the table while everyone else stayed silent, waiting for her reaction. The air in the room felt heavy, but she didn't let it break her. She slowly pushed her chair back and stood up, her eyes meeting Taremba's one last time. Her voice was soft but steady as she said, "I stayed because I loved you, Taremba. Not because I needed you." There was no anger in her tone, no shouting, no tears, just the truth. Her words seemed to hang in the air, sharp and clear, cutting deeper than any argument could. Taremba blinked, as if he wasn't sure he had heard her right, but Ofi didn't give him the chance to respond. She simply nodded to the others at the table, offering a polite, "Thank you for dinner," before turning away. The room stayed quiet as the sound of her heels tapped against the floor. Each step she took seemed to echo, making the silence even louder. Nobody dared to stop her. She reached the door, opened it slowly, and stepped outside. The cool night air wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time in a long while, she felt light. She didn't look back, not once. She didn't need to see Taremba's face to know he was still frozen in his chair, replaying her words over and over in his head. She knew those words would follow him long after she was gone. Ofi walked down the path, her shoulders straight, her head high. She wasn't running away, she was walking towards herself, towards the life she deserved. Every step away from that table felt like another chain breaking, another weight lifting from her chest. Inside, Taremba sat motionless. The food on his plate had gone cold, but he couldn't lift his fork. He could still hear her voice in his head, calm but unshakable, reminding him that she had chosen him out of love, not out of need. And now, she had chosen to leave for the same reason, because she loved herself more. The others at the table glanced at each other, but no one spoke. They all knew they had just witnessed something rare, a goodbye that wasn't loud, but was powerful enough to leave the whole room speechless. As Ofi disappeared into the quiet streets, her steps grew lighter, her breathing easier. She didn't need to prove anything, didn't need to explain further. She had said what needed to be said, and now the rest was up to Taremba to live with. And deep inside, she knew, walking away wasn't the end for her. It was the beginning. Ofi's new apartment was nothing like the house she had shared with Taremba. It was bright, filled with plants, and every corner smelled of fresh sea air. Each morning, she woke up to the sound of waves, a reminder that she was free and in control of her life. She poured her energy into growing her company, opening new branches, and giving opportunities to women who, like her, had once been told they weren't enough. The office buzzed with laughter and ambition, and Ofi made sure every voice was heard. She never once mentioned the $80 million to anyone, she didn't need to. The same people who had dismissed her as just a housewife now looked at her with awe, calling her unstoppable. And Ofi knew in her heart, owning her name was worth more than any deal. If you believe no one has the right to define your worth but you, share Ofi's story, and let the world know that every woman's name deserves to be spoken with respect.